spend the summer
Mm-hmm.
and get back home and maybe maybe have a penny or two left over.
Right.
Anyway, you just applied wherever you wanted to. So we got this book and we looked through it and there was a good looking, good sounding program in Riverside, California. We said, well, that's new country for us, and we applied for that and got it.
Mm-hmm.
So left here as soon as just about as soon as school was out, and we were going to be real upbeat about things and get there a little early and whatever. Well, we drive in. We found the Riverside College all right.
Mm-hmm.
Drove into it and got to looking around. Couldn't see anybody anywhere. And we were there a Saturday morning, and we drove around, and couldn't find anybody. We was wondering what was going on, and finally found a janitor or something working. He says, "Oh, this is a Seventh Day
Mm-hmm.
institution,
Right.
but everything is closed down on Saturday."
Right.
But they found us a place to stay. They were real nice.
Yeah. It's a well. So it's a group that they really indoctrinate their folks. So it's really hard to talk to someone that's
They didn't have any tea or coffee or anything like that.
no, they're very
No caffeine.
very regimented in Portland, Tennessee, where I lived for a good while, where my parents uh, passed away, and we lived there for a decent while. There was a large Seventh Day Adventist church there, and they had a school. It was a boarding school, and so the really devout Seventh Day Adventists, they will send their kids away because, as a whole, most Seventh Day Adventists are fairly small. Like Boonville has one; it's a fairly small group. And so a lot of times they'll send their kids away to places like in Portland, Tennessee, where the big churches are, and they'll send them to these boarding schools where they'll go K through 12. And so they'll get really deeply entrenched and indoctrinated in all they teach. And I dare say most of their leaders and their higher ups at Seventh Day Adventists have come through similar type, those boarding schools where and I mean they're very separate in what they do in those type of confines. And I know one time we inquired if there was something we could do to help out school. Said no, we don't need any help. And you know, it's very different when you get behind the curtain on some of that. Um, but anyway, it's different. Now, most places, like I say, they're not very big, but where they're big, they really tend to entrench and yeah, and they probably had a school there. And if you checked in the school, it's not like a regular school. It's a school where they live there and they're taught from sunrise to sundown things that are Seventh Day Adventist. And you know Whatever it's worth now. But anyway, uh, you know the thing that I wish that we were more like, somewhere we used to be just as dedicated as far as our rank and file members of, going out and doing things. You'll still see. In fact, I think Haley said sometime last week or something. I forget what I was doing, so I didn't get to go to the door. But there was some Mormon uh, young gentlemen that came to our door. They come from time to time. There was, you'll occasionally get Jehovah's Witness, although we're kind of void Jehovah's Witness right now. But you get in places where there's a bigger Jehovah's Witness, they'll usually come to your door from time to time. Seventh Day Adventists, they'll do the same from time to time. But you don't see that a lot in Church of Christ anymore. Now, we'll use the thing, well, it's not very effective. Well, there's more to effectiveness than just raw numbers. Uh, you know, these guys going around doing roofs. I mean, I guarantee most of them are tickled pink if they get one person that says, "Yeah, I need to, yeah, go ahead and look at it," and then they get a job from it. Um, it takes effort to get anything you want in life, no matter what it is, and we've kind of grown out of that, of doing whatever it takes to try to get out there and talk to people. But it does something else too. The people that are part of that, there is something about it energizes you going out, talking to people, trying to talk to them about, it gets you out of a comfort zone. It gets you into a mode where you're more apt to talk to someone about something. And there's a lot of indirect benefits when you start doing things like that. And so, our enthusiasm is not what some places are. And now different people do it different ways. I mean, a lot of your community churches, which are basically, they'll say they're non-denomination. To be honest, it's no longer appropriate for us to call ourselves non-denomination because the world thinks non-denominational means you're open to all denominations. So, and that's generally what a community church is. We are truly undenominational or basically anti-denominational. We predate, or I've heard some people say we're pre-denominational. We believe in the church in New Testament times. So, but they'll do it different ways. I mean, and even a lot of especially your more progressive, as they would call themselves, Baptist churches, they'll have a rock band. They'll use money. And, I don't think that's, you see these televangelists, they'll have yachts, they'll have islands, they'll have money like crazy because the money goes to the people there. And it's like, okay, I don't really think that's right either. And so, but the thing is, our enthusiasm, we used to compete with all that. A lot of that stuff has been around for a long time. And we always would compete with it because we had the same amount of enthusiasm in them. And so really, that's a lot of our issues now is the dedication, enthusiasm we don't have like we once did. And in order for us to turn things around, we've got to redevelop that. And it may take some time before that happens. I don't believe COVID pretty much it got us to a point where it's just the really core members left. Some people look down on that, but the truth of the matter is those are the ones we can do something with. Right. Sometimes I think the church used to spend a lot of time on people that really weren't that committed. And so you had a lot of people that weren't committed. Maybe they had some teens or maybe they had some young kids. And so we would cater to their desires. Well, we want more money for the young. We want more, of this. We want more of that, and so the church a lot of times would do that, and yet we never did cultivate a lot of those people into becoming more dedicated themselves, and they wanted someone to do it for them. I never was opposed to youth ministry, and some of my best friends are youth ministers. But the whole concept of how youth ministers developed was a lot of your good-sized congregations like, well, none of us parents have time for that. Let's hire someone and they'll take care of our kids. And there became a disconnect with parents being the primary mentors for the kids and this youth minister who may be just out of college and probably is, it's just the way it is. He's probably not as much faith as maybe he should have been. And it just isn't the right model. Now, youth ministers that do the best are generally youth ministers that work where the parents still are very much involved, and they just, they do a lot of the classes. They do a lot of if they do go somewhere. But if the parents aren't involved, it's not going to work in the long run. And I think the generation that most people around now, they grew up having all kinds of youth things, and it didn't translate into turning those kids into strong Christians when they became adults. And so that didn't work. Now, there's elements that did good. I'm not trying to knock all of it, but the point is we've got to get back to, I really liked that Bible class that Steve had a couple weeks ago about making disciples. We've got to get back to making disciples first and foremost. We make a really good disciple, they're going to do the things that need to be done. A lot of people worried at COVID, this group, they can't be here because they have health issues and everything. And I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends and a lot of churches were worried about some of these people that couldn't attend during the COVID when, it was such a health scare. And I was like, I don't worry about those folks in the sense that they're going to fall away. Because whenever they could, whenever it was safe again, they would be back because they really desperately wanted to be part of the assembly. The ones I worried about was, and I can see who watches streams and stuff, and the ones I worried about is the people that didn't come during that time, even though they were young and healthy, and they didn't come all that much during that time, even when we was trying to get something going, they weren't watching the stream either. And the weak ones are the ones that, and those are the ones that all these churches have lost. They've lost the ones that really weren't that dedicated. And so I hope it's a lesson to us now that we've got to develop disciples better. And yes, there's always going to be things happen in our lives, but if they're a true committed disciple, they're always going to come back because that's where their heart is always. Anybody have any thoughts? I don't want to ramble on too long. Anybody have any thoughts? Or
I think too that this COVID thing, the country, the government, so on and so forth, overreacted to it. If you would have taken all of a series of COVID shots and so on and so forth, I think, they had to hurry up and find something that could control it. And I think if you took all of those, which we did, so far we have bypassed COVID. And I think it's due to the fact that we took all of the shots. And
maybe
continuing to take them.
It may be, but I don't know. The science is really not supporting that now because a lot of people took all the shots, still got COVID.
It just scared people to death.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I'm not knocking the concept of the vaccine and everything. It was, I think, a way to alleviate fears and to get everybody somewhat back to normal. But it turns out there were repercussions to taking the vaccine because it was so new. It hadn't really been tested like others. And so now they do actually report the side effects that the vaccine has. And what's really awful about it, most of these side effects impact young people who were never really at that much risk of getting COVID. And there was a lot of stuff that was in the name of science that wasn't science. The whole 6 foot rule was baloney. It was just somebody just came up with that to try to, and so a lot of it was unknown, fear of the unknown. The world had never faced anything like that. Most people did the best they could. If that meant, I took the vaccine, if that took that, whatever it took, we kind of did it. Now we know that there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of denials of things that were true that they tried to say wasn't true. There was definitely overreach by government on a lot of issues. But that isn't really what changed churches, okay? We were a little bit like ostriches with our heads in the sand, and that we should have known for a while. I've had people talk about this even when I was a little kid. Churches will have a huge crowd Sunday mornings. They'll have a little crowd on Sunday nights and a littler crowd on Wednesday nights. That's been going on for decades now. And yet we was like, yeah, but they're here Sunday and they'll do part of the activities and they'll do this. But after COVID, if you look at our numbers, our Sunday morning crowds are down. But our Wednesday and Sunday evening really aren't that down that much. So what do you explain that to? Well, that's to this concept of people that really weren't as committed as they should be. We're going along. What happened is COVID broke them of their habit. It was kind of a habit. You go to church on Sunday morning. A lot of people now, they don't go to church on Sunday morning. They'll do their own thing. And, is it better they be in church? Well, yeah, they may hear something. But for the fact of the matter is, it was somewhat foolish on our thought to think they were devout, strong members when they probably weren't. And we should have been working more on them to try to get them more involved, to get them more grounded in what they should have known. So I hope that we learn from this, and in our new approach, we work more on developing these strong disciples, because ultimately, that's been the biggest change. It also happens to be a lot of the younger crowd are the ones that have been most impacted by COVID. And they're the ones that have pretty much, you don't see them. They don't go anywhere, and they probably won't go anywhere because they no longer see a need for church, because the church didn't do enough during COVID that really impacted their lives. And that's somewhat on us, but yet mainly the fact was we didn't do enough before COVID to where they would have been grounded. If they were grounded like some of our older members, as soon as they could, they would have been back. But they're not. And, somewhere in my lifetime, used to when I was a little kid, you never heard of a person that was a Church of Christ member ever leaving for a denomination or for another entity. They may fall away, but they wouldn't go to another entity because they knew it was wrong. A lot of times they'd come back too, but that was how we grounded people and instilled them. But now it's, I see as many people in Church of Christ leaving for this or that, and I'm like, well, they should know better, but they weren't grounded. And I don't mean, I know a lot of Bible class teachers worked hard with some of those kids and other things, but they weren't grounded. If they were, they wouldn't be leaving for something else. Now, whatever it may be, whatever reason. I don't know. So what's your thoughts on what we need to do now? I think a good start's what we did with the kids on Wednesday nights and what we're going to be doing with VBS. So if you weren't here last night, we've got some big plans. I have some generous people that are taking any of the, sometimes, it should never be the biggest reason we don't do something, but yet it is a practical matter. The elders got to make sure that the money is used wisely, that we don't overuse for this or that. The fact you have a building, you've got to do maintenance, you got to do other things on it. So it just takes it out of the consideration process when we have people that donate things for a use like this. And I think it's always appreciative. But I think but one thing that I would encourage is we're not going to have adult classes. That was decided last night. And so that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be here. And I think maybe sometimes, at some point we divided up congregations. And I understand, I've been to large congregations. You have to do it from a practical standpoint. You get above 300 and you can't know everybody. You can't do everything everybody. And so you have to, if you're a congregation over 300, you have to do a little bit of dividing up in order to function right. Now, the best ones, I think, will rotate that around every now and then to where, you do over, several years kind of get to know everybody. But you've got to do that. And small churches never really needed to do that. But at some point, we started doing that too. We'd have our youth group, we'd have our little kids, we'd have our older individuals, we'd have our young adults, and we divided up. And I think that made us weaker. I don't know. And so the point is, when we have stuff for kids like VBS, I think it's just as important that our older people are there. It shows support. It also shows interest, and the kids recognize that when they see, those kids on Wednesday night, when they see the adults, they'd actually, I think that made their nights better than just, teachers. Teachers, they feel they have to be here, but when someone else is here, it made them feel important. Any thoughts on that? So,
We're not too thoughtful.
huh?
We're not too thoughtful.
No, you're not. You need some coffee. Get some coffee like Marm there. Okay, well let's get to our lesson just a little bit. So we talked last week about Solomon. The first part of 1 Kings 11. Solomon turns from the Lord. King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. That was the first one. And, it just, 700 wives and 300 concubines. That just boggles the imagination of how. Now, I will say this. I mean, it apparently was his weakness, his crutch, because it didn't say he just had them. It says he loved them. But that in of itself turned out bad. So these foreign women, what did they eventually, it says they turned his heart eventually in verse 4. How did that happen? Why was his heart turned? What did he do? How did they turn his heart?
Married all of those women in that was foreign, and they turned his heart away.
Okay. Is it the fact they was foreign? I mean, there are examples of, we mentioned this last week, Rahab. In fact, she had been a prostitute before she came in contact with the Israelites. You have Ruth, who was a Moabite. It might be one of the countries mentioned. I don't know. But anyway, Moabite. That's not an Israelite by any means. And so what was about these foreign women? Why did they turn his heart?
Some of them idol worship.
They were all idol worshipers. Well, just some.
Yeah, they're awful.
They were all. And what did Solomon do? Because I'm sure he would say, out of his love for them, what would he do for each one of them?
Let them do.
He'd not only let them do, what else would he do?
They wanted.
He build them houses.
He'd build them houses. He'd build them altars. He'd build them whatever they wanted for their God. So he went beyond what, it wasn't just live and let live. I mean, that would have been one thing, and that would have been bad in and of itself. But he actually went beyond that. He would build them altars. He would build them places where they could worship their foreign God. Here, there, everywhere. And so he no longer was committed to God. That's how his heart was turned. But what had God told the Israelites?
What did he what?
What had God told the Israelites about intermarrying?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. And guess what?
When you went to look for a wife within your own nation.
And
So in verse 2 of chapter 11, it even quotes back from the law of Moses. It says, "You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart after their gods." Had nothing to do with where they're from, i.e. Ruth, i.e. Rahab. They were believers in God before they ever were married to an Israelite. So it had nothing to do with that. Had nothing to do with, color of anybody's skin. Had nothing to do with any of that people sometimes want to assign this to. God is not a racist. God is not a respecter of persons. But it had to do with what God they worshiped. Did they worship the true God, or did they worship a false idol? And so God said, if these people from these lands, as their idol worshipers, you marry them as idol worshipers, they're going to turn your heart away from serving God. Now, we talked a little bit about, even as a Christian, when I was a kid, it was talked a little more about, you don't marry a non-Christian. Now, I don't believe it's quite sinful to say if you marry someone that's not a Christian, but I want to tell you it's very ill-advised. And, it should be something. Now, when I was a teenager, I went to a church not too far from here in Sallisaw. And I remember quite vividly we had about 3 teenage girls, and they were popular. But it seems like one part of our little growth that we had when my dad was there was these teenage girls, when they start dating a boy, they say, "Well, I won't date you unless you come to church." And so they'd be in church with them. And then they'd be like, "Well, if you want to keep dating me, you need to study the Bible with me." And then lo and behold, they'd be baptized and converted. And it was rather interesting seeing that dynamic, because most people that start dating in teens, they don't stay with whoever they start dating anyway. And so some of these young men, they would be Christians and they would break up with the girl, but they'd still come to church. And then the next person, they'd do the same thing with them. Now, that used to be the thought process of how we operated. If you're going to date someone that's non-Christian, that's fine, but you're going to do your best to convert them before you ever get more involved with them. I've also known people that they'll bring their, who they're dating to church, and they'll come with them anytime they ask them. They'll always be there. But they don't quite get to the conversion standpoint. Then they get married. And 9 times out of 10, what happens then? You don't ever see them again. They got what they were after, and so they feel like they don't have to really work to keep that. And it's much harder. It's much harder after you're married to convert someone, because it's not the same. When you're in that love mode, you're willing to do just about anything. And so you'll study, you'll do other things. Now, I don't think people become a true Christian just because someone would want them to. I don't think that's definitely not right. But you've got a better chance for them being willing to study when they're in that mode. After the fact, once they're married, it's just not the same. It's not the same thing. It's also tougher if you. The worst example of what can happen is if you compromise your beliefs and then get married to someone. It's hard for you to get back to that level where they respect what you believe in religion. It's not impossible, but you've made it even harder for you to do that. The best thing you can do if you do get married to a non-Christian, be as faithful as you can. It's going to be tough. And if you do, I knew a lady in Texas. She married a guy that his parents were raised in the church, and he grew up as a young boy in the church, but never was baptized, never went to church most of his whole life. And I think they've been married over 50 years at the time when I moved there, and I went and visited him and talked to him, and he agreed to come to church with her, and he came to church for about a month, and he wanted to talk to me, and we studied with him, and he was baptized. He was, I think, 88 or something years old. We baptized him, and he only lived about 6 months after that. He didn't know it at the time. It came down with something after, but still, the point is, she, though, throughout that 50 plus years, 60 years that they were married, she was always at church. Any function, she was there. Even if he said, I don't want you going, she said, I'm going to be at church. And that's the way she was for that length of time. And it finally paid dividend. Some people, it doesn't take as long, but some people, it never happens. And so, that's the best you can do if you get yourself in that situation. But it's tough because it's easy, that you have a spouse that says, I want you to stay. Well, let's go do something, today. And you do that once, and it becomes easier to do it time in, time out. So anyway, so was God right? Was God right what he told the Israelites? God, that's harsh. Why should you condemn people just because they're different than we are? I'm sure some people argue that. But was God right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very right. So we can read. I need to fix that screen a little bit.
Like that old boy had a lot of wives, 700.
And 300
Big boy,
concubines.
wasn't he?
and 300 concubines, which to a king, a concubine was just like a wife. Um, and yeah, so to a king, a it's very much just like a wife. So in essence, he had 1,000 women. That so a concubine was treated legally just like a wife, and you know, uh, in essence, they were married in the sense that they couldn't be with any other man. They they received some of the privileges of being a spouse, but they didn't get all the perks. I guess they didn't get their kids weren't legal heirs or anything like that. Um, so anyway, in First Kings, where's my mouse? There it is. 5:8 says, "For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites." Now, Ashtaroth was a female goddess, obviously goddess, so female. Do you know where people would worship Ashtaroth? Trees. Yeah, so they'd worship the trees. So that was Ashtaroth. Baal, Baal was generally a animal of some type. It varied a little bit from different cultures to others, but so they would worship a animal, much like the Israelites did when they, made a golden calf. But anyway, Solomon followed him. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow the Lord as David, his father, had done. Then Solomon built a high place. Once again, it's not that he actually built these things for him. A high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab. Now, once again, it's not the people of Moab. It's the fact that they were pagan idol worshippers. Ruth was from Moab, but she chose to worship Naomi's God and treat God as the true God. And so that's why it wasn't quite the same. Now, there were still repercussions in the law of Moses if you did that. It was so many generations before your descendants could actually be considered lawful, to do all the perks that a Jew would or Israelite would. And Moloch, the abomination of the Amalekites on the mountain east of Jerusalem. Now, what about Moloch? What was the worshippers of Moloch probably most known for? There's going to be a future king that basically worshiped Moloch. What was the big requirement of Moloch? What kind of sacrifices did you have to make to Moloch?
Sacrifice.
Yeah, not just any human.
Children.
Yeah, your own children. You had to offer up your children in a fire. And Moloch, the abomination, and on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign women, wives, who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. So now we're going to get into Solomon. We're going to briefly study Ecclesiastes start next week and see, I think, some redemption in Solomon. But Solomon really messed things up. Now, what can we do? Well, how can we make sure we don't allow our hearts to go astray? What are some things that we need to work on? How do we keep our hearts from leaving God as our number one priority?
Stay in the Word.
We'll stay in the Word. I've got scripture up here that Philippians 4:8-9 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me," in the Word, "practice these things, and the God of peace be with you." So that's what we should do. How do we get our hearts separated from that sometimes? And I'm not specifically talking about the men in this group, but talking about in general. What takes some people away from these things?
Our associates.
Our associates. Talking about teens when I was growing up. I remember this one class I had, and it didn't matter what time of year, what it was about. It was always about peer pressure. And everything was about peer pressure. That was just the times. I believe everybody did that. And I'm thinking, what good is it to talk about peer pressure if you're not giving a teen the tools to handle peer pressure? So if they don't know what the Bible says, how are they to respond to this peer pressure? For example, Jesus, when he was being tempted by Satan, how did he deal with Satan? What did he do each and every time?
Prayer.
Well, prayer, but how did he respond to Satan each and every time?
Oh,
He just
Get
read
behind
with
him.
Scripture.
Huh?
Told him to get behind him.
Well, he did eventually, but he used scripture. He quoted scripture to rebuke Satan. So if a young person is not being prepared in what the Bible says, they have no tools to deal with peer pressure. They may understand it, but they won't understand how to deal with it. But I've often thought, to be honest, I think adults struggle with peer pressure more than teens do. Teens have their parents. Teens have friends that are good. Teens have, these resources. But parents struggle with it. What about people at work? If you work in a job that's you got a lot of secular people and everything, maybe it was a hard day. Especially, I think maybe young adults, say it's a hard day, and they say, "Hey, let's go to this bar. It's supposed to be a good place. Got good food and best beer in town." And
Put up with it for 35 years at Whirlpool.
yeah. What if it's your boss telling you to do this?
Yeah,
And you want to get, huh?
At the
Well,
time
and
it
you
was.
want to get in good side of your boss. You're like, well, maybe I should go. And cussing, boy, you were blessed at Chemical Weed, but most jobs, that's the element. And what does it tend to do over time? It bleeds into your vernacular, and on and on the list can go. What we watch, what we read, who we do associate with, can turn us away. That's why I think it's always important that the church do certain things, because our best associates, our closest people we're around, really should be fellow Christians. Sometimes it's not possible, maybe if you're really small, but that should be the case, should it not? Because when you're around Christians that are like-minded, guess what? You're not as drawn to the temptation of these other things as much. Just society in general. You watch the news. I don't watch a lot of news. I know my kids think I do, but I really don't, unless it's something big going on. But I don't watch a lot of news because, well, it don't matter which side you listen to. It's always a lot of vicious, wordplay. It's not the way you should act towards people. And, and the language that's used on just regular TV now is it just bewilders me that that's considered okay. It bewilders me that some people consider themselves Christians and cuss like crazy. I'm like, where do you get that from? The Bible condemns that. And so on and on the list can go, that it's easy to get pulled away from what you should. Money is a big influence. We live in an era now where, what makes you feel good? You deserve to feel good. You deserve to be happy. Anybody ever heard anything like that? That's what the world says. And so, you need a break every now and then. You need to do this every now and then. You need to do that. It just cracks me up that, I might need a break, but I never need a break from God. That's just foolishness to think that we ever in a situation where we just should take a break away from God. Yet some people will go fishing on a Sunday because, hey, weather's good. I've been waiting to go fishing all year. They'll go golfing on a Sunday. It's like, I got this to do, or they'll go, whatever it is, and then they'll justify it. I just needed a break. And we need to be careful. So what would be the repercussions for Solomon? Well, in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9, we start seeing them. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord and the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. When they talk about, when you read about God being a long-suffering God, how would you equate what God had to feel when Solomon had done this? You know, I dare say if you went from Genesis all the way to Revelation and you counted every single person that the Lord actually spoke with, it's not that many. Maybe 100, I don't know. That'd be a good exercise sometime to count. See how many people God actually spoke to. And most of them probably once. How many times did he speak to Solomon? Twice. Huh. And what had God done for Solomon? Beyond speaking to him,
Gave him everything he wanted.
basically he did. Not only that, and think about it. Now, when Solomon was young, was it just a given that Solomon was going to be king? I mean, that's who God said would be. But, if it just left it up to the people of that era, it probably would have been one of his older brothers. In fact, just being king, God had a large hand in that. And then God asked him what he wanted. He said, I want to be able to rule my people wisely, to discern, how to best rule. And God said, I'm going to give you that. All that, I'm going to give you all the
Stuff you didn't ask for.
all this stuff you didn't ask for.
That most people would have.
Yes. And his heart turned. So, I can only imagine if you had a child that you had raised and done all kinds of things for, just totally rejected you. I'm not talking about doing something you don't approve of or don't like, but I'm talking about rejecting you. And nothing you did, but you did always good for them. They just rejected you. That would be really harsh. Now, to show the long-suffering God, what would we do a lot of times, something like that? We'd reject them back, would we not? We wouldn't want anything to do with them. Or we'd, like say if you was a king and you had a son that did stuff like that, you'd probably have him killed or whatever, especially back in those days. So what does God do? God doesn't do that. I will say it does appear, though, a lot of God's mercy on Solomon wasn't really for Solomon. It was for who? David. Yeah. And the promises he made to David. Now, I do believe Solomon does repent, so we'll get to that. But verse 11, therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice. So third time he's speaking to him, but the first two was really good. The second one's right after he built the temple. Well, this one's not so good. Therefore the Lord said to him, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet, for the sake of David, your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of your hand of your son. So, Solomon, and legacy is a big thing to kings, especially. It's even to politicians today. They want to have a legacy that they did this and they were over that. But Solomon would know that his legacy would be in that the whole kingdom be ripped apart because of what he did. Says, however, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David, my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad. Let's see, I lost my place. Hadad, the Edomite. By the way, where was Edom? What was Edom? We've studied about this
No,
It's been a while, but
no,
Edom means red. So who was the founder of the Edomites, I guess? Somewhat related to the Israelites. So you have the Israelites. Who were the Israelites named after? You know, he was renamed Israel when he wrestled with the angel. Who was that? Jacob. Okay, so it's the tribes of Jacob, the tribes of Israel. He was the, where the Israelites started their chain. Obviously, they tie themselves to Abraham as well. But who was Jacob's brother? His twin? Esau. Esau was hairy and red. So the land in which he settled and his descendants grew large and strong was Edom. In the New Testament, very similar. It's the same word, Idumea. That's where Herod the Great comes from. But anyway, he raised him up adversaries. That's not going to be the only adversary. He's going to have others. And I do want to talk about Hadad is eventually put down. But next week, before we get into Ecclesiastes, I want to talk about in 1 Kings 11, we first read about a gentleman named Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And if there is a villain during the time of the kings, he was it. I mean, he's the one that every future bad king is always referenced to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And sometimes, it's almost humorous. They'll say they did evil, but not the evil that Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, did. And so he is the standard by which all future bad kings are judged. But yet, it didn't have to be that way. And God actually gave him all that he had, but he didn't really believe that God, I guess, could do it. But anyway, Solomon, Solomon would suffer, but not technically while he was king. I find that kind of interesting, that was God's punishment for Solomon, that the kingdom would be divided among after he's king. And he did it for his father David. We will get into Ecclesiastes next week. It may take us a few weeks to get through it. We're not going to do a verse-by-verse Ecclesiastes. We're going to do kind of a more theme-by-theme of different things and just show the things that Solomon did and how he ultimately came to the conclusion it was worthless and what he ultimately says. Any other thoughts or comments?